When an elderly woman decided to adopt a pit bull, several people believed it was a foolish decision. Months later, when they heard someone scream, these same people feared it would prove their worries were justified. Annika was an elderly lady living in a cold, rural area of Russia. She had very few worldly possessions and mostly kept to herself. People saw her as a bit of a loner and someone who should be avoided. It was a sad and lonely existence, but one that suited Annika. She had never needed anyone through her life, so why should she start now? She had once been married though and had a daughter. Unfortunately though, her husband had died 20 years prior, and after the funeral, her daughter moved away to live with her husband in the city that he worked in many hundreds of miles, kilometers away. It was rare that she ever got to see her daughter, son-in-law, or grandson. Still, Annika was an independent and headstrong woman and didn't want to complain or look needy. Annika wasn't completely cold and heartless though. She had a love for animals. She had always kept animals throughout her life, but since her last dog had run away, she had never replaced it. But there was a certain animal that kept hanging around in the streets outside of her house, a large and beastly-looking pit bull. It was obviously a stray, and it roamed the streets in search of food and scraps to survive. Being the animal lover that she was, Annika started to put out food for the dog. It would cautiously approach the plate of treats that she would position at the end of the path and quickly eat them before any other animals came along and stole them first. Annika noticed that the pit bull was thin and looked like it needed some care and attention, but unfortunately, on the occasions when she approached it, it would run away. She had to devise a plan to win its affection, and so whenever Annika would put food down, she would sit in a chair several meters away. As the days and weeks went on, she would get closer and closer each time, and the pit bull would become used to the woman being there. It became acclimatized to her presence and associated the old woman being there with receiving food. Soon enough, Annika was able to gently stroke its head as it ate. The pit bull was, of course, still nervous and jumpy, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it had been many months before when it had first shown up on the street. Annika was especially pleased with the progress she had made with the animal, but there was a problem. The other people that lived in the street were not as fond of the giant and dangerous-looking dog as Annika was. While they had been content to leave her alone and keep to her own business, encouraging the dog to their neighborhood was the last straw. The neighbors did not want this potentially dangerous pit bull roaming their streets day after day, especially when many of the people had children. If the pit bull decided to turn violent, then it could easily kill a youngster. The neighbors wrote the dog off as a bad dog and tried to chase it away. Annika was distraught and angry, and it all came to her head when several of the people that lived near her called the dog shelter to come and take the pit bull away and destroy it. This outraged Annika, who knew the dog far better than any of her neighbor. She knew that even though it looked big and strong, it was a calm, quiet, gentle, and even nervous animal. It would never harm a fly. All it wanted was love and attention. So, thinking fast, Annika made her quick but life-changing decision. She would adopt the pit bull properly. No one could complain or have it taken away then. But still, the neighbors complained. They told Annika that pit bulls were announced for being dangerous and violent dogs. She was an elderly woman, and if the dog decided to get angry, it could easily do a lot of damage to her. The neighbors might not have been close to Annika, but all the same they didn't want to see her get injured or worse. For weeks, the neighbors tried to dissuade her and make her change her mind, but Annika's mind was set, and before long, she had adopted the pit bull, naming it Benji. Still, timid and shy, the dog often stayed in Annika's house away from the outside. It was cold and scary out there, and people frequently shouted at Benji. In the house, everything was calm, quiet, and warm. He eventually put on weight and looked healthier, and over the months he came out of his shell. One day, a young boy arrived at the door, no older than 5 years old. It was Annika's grandson. His mother had dropped him off to stay with his grandmother for the weekend. Benji, despite his tough appearances, was still very timid and scared and stayed a safe distance from the boy. He did, however, keep an eye on the child as he played. Annika found it very strange how the dog watched over the child, but she saw it as a comfort and a sign that the dog was gentle and calm, nothing like what her neighbors had said. As the young boy played in the garden, Benji plucked up enough courage to go and sit in the shade of an old tree and study him as he ran around. Benji watched as the boy appeared into the large pond in the garden, watched the fish swim before he went and had fun on the swing set. But suddenly the dog felt that something was wrong. It was almost like a sixth sense, as nothing had happened, yet he stood upright and growled softly, but no one would believe what happened next. Out of nowhere, Annika's neighbors heard a blood-curdling scream. It was coming from Annika's yard where her grandchild was playing. Knowing that Benji, the pit bull, was also in the yard, they feared the worst. The dog may have suddenly become violent and returned to its natural state of aggression. If it had bitten the boy or Annika, there was very little chance that either of them would survive the sustained injuries from the vicious assault. The neighbors knew for certain it was only a matter of time until it happened. They had all tried to warn her, but she had never listened to their warnings, and now it was too late. The neighbors ran as fast as they could to appear over the wall, but what they saw shocked them and left them feeling ashamed at how they had judged Benji, the pit bull, so harshly. In the yard, and had stumbled and fallen into the large pond. He was too young to know how to swim and was struggling to keep his head above the water. This is where Benji had jumped into action, throwing himself into the water and dragging the child to the side of the pond and to safety. The whole ordeal had played out in front of Annika's eyes, and she had been frozen in fear, worried that she was about to see her grandson drown. She had let out the blood-curdling scream just as Benji had dived in and saved the day. He truly was a heroic dog. The neighbors, no longer afraid of the pit bull, helped Annika's grandson and the dog out of the water. They wrapped them in towels and blankets to keep them warm, while several people comforted a shocked Annika herself. Benji just wagged his tail. He was happy to help and glad to have all these people giving him plenty of strokes and pats. He loved all the attention. Benji wasn't a bad dog at all. In fact, he was the most heroic and selfless dog that the neighborhood had ever seen. Not only had he saved the boy from certain death, but he had also won over the hearts and minds of every single one of the people who didn't like him at first. So now it's over to you. What did you think of this incredible story? What are your views on Benji the pit bull after he saved Annika's grandson's life? Have you ever judged a dog or even a person before you've got to know them properly? As always, we love to hear from you, so be sure to let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below.